Hello, Paula. Hello, and welcome to Salem Voices. I'm Lucy Rose, your host, and I am so excited today to introduce our special guest from the Salem College class of 1979, Paula Rowland. Paula joined us today for her home in Seattle, Washington. Hey, Paula.
Hi, Lucy. Nice to talk to you today.
Nice to talk to you too. What a pleasure. All right, I can't wait for me to hear and everybody else to hear your incredibly interesting story. From Salem Senior to global public health expert. And I know you're not real comfortable with the word expert, but you've had a lot of experience. How does that sound?
Experience. That's a good word.
Experience global health. All right. What an impact you've had in your life and your journey so far. And you've done it in addition to having 3 children, which is the most remarkable thing ever to me, how people multitask for such important things. But wow. If you will, fill us in. You got 5 minutes or less from the time you left Salem to where you are today. What happened in your life?
Okay, thank you. Well, I was thinking about this, and at Salem, I was doing food, and I did the degree in food and nutrition. I was really interested in community nutrition, not dietetics. And so I knew that I wanted to take the road in public health. So I went to UNC Chapel Hill and applied to the master's program at that time. And I was told wisely that I should go get some experience and come back, give myself some time to get some experience. Very, very good advice. And so at that time, the world was very focused on the tragedy in Southeast Asia, especially in Cambodia. And so I was aware of the refugee crisis on the border of Thailand, Laos, and other countries, and wanted just to be a part of that, especially since my interest was in malnutrition, and I knew that there was huge issues of malnutrition. And so I prepared to go, and knowing that I didn't have a lot of experience, I didn't think I would be hired, but I had some family friends who lived in Thailand, and they were willing to help me connect. And so I flew over there and got to the refugee camp and started knocking on doors. And as I imagined, there were a lot of opportunities. And so I was hired as an assistant community nutritionist for CARE International. And so while I was there, I just encountered a few things and knew I wanted more education so I could have a different platform from which to speak. And so then I came back to UCLA to the global health program that I had been introduced to through some people I met there. And then got my master's in public health and went ahead and got a PhD in comparative international education, because I was interested in the intersection of education and health. And then life continues, and through children and through some stops and some starts and some part-time work, children grow up, get out of school. And so then I entered back full-time in the field that I'm in right now, which is in evaluation.
And we can explore that further. Because I mean, what good does it do to have programs if you're not constantly improving them and evaluating them?
Right, exactly.
So we're going to go there because that's just vital. But first, you just dropped a bomb here. I mean, you just said, I think, you left Salem College as a 21, 22-year-old by yourself, went to Thailand. Is that? And presented yourself with no job, no nothing, saying, I want to make a difference. I want to get involved. Will somebody please hire me?
Yes.
To one of the world's largest refugee camps, if I listen to the program.
There's 140,000 people at the refugee camp where I was working.
140,000 people.
Yes.
And there you are by yourself. What in the world gave you the courage to do that? What drove you to do that? Are you kidding? How did you do that?
Well, I think I can blame my parents.
Okay.
They had always, my parents are in ministry. I grew up in Mexico City, and my parents were missionaries there. And I was raised with a global view, of just a global worldview. And I was very blessed to have been exposed throughout my childhood and youth to needs, to physical needs, emotional and spiritual needs. And I was encouraged by my parents to always find my place in the world where I could be responding to those needs. And so they're the ones I would blame when I was leaving and they were all worried about me. I said, this is all your fault. You raised me to do exactly this. And one of my favorite pictures is at the airport at that time, and saying goodbye to my parents, and just the smile on my face and the pride in on their face as I launched off into this adventure.
Oh, my word. I mean, truly, there can't be many people who have done that in their lives at that age by yourself. When you were there, what did you learn? What was your biggest take home? And I want to explore in a minute the story you told me about baby food, because
Okay.
I think that is such a key learning based on what you shared with me. But in addition to that, without spoiling that one, what would you say
Okay.
were your biggest take homes from that experience?
Well, I think the one important thing to do in life is to put ourselves in uncomfortable situations, because that's where you grow. You grow. You don't grow in the comfort of the known. You grow in the discomfort of the unknown. And so I would say that going to a place where I couldn't even read the letters because I didn't know the script, couldn't understand the number on a bus, had to use all kinds of ways to communicate. I learned that humans are humans wherever you are. We're united by just that, what makes us human. And I've learned that you can do, when you set your mind to it, you can do things that you didn't think you could. And the best way to get over fear is to confront it. And there were times I was afraid and I was feeling very insecure, but I am so grateful for that experience that happened at such a pivotal time in my life.
I was going to say, what a life-shaping experience for
It was
you.
a life-shaping, yes.
Learning, yes, I can,
Mhm.
at such an age is amazing. Was there anything you learned at Salem or that Salem did perhaps to help you find that courage or utilize fully the experience or anything?
I think I really grew in confidence at Salem. Salem was a safe place that encouraged me to be all that I could be. And I remember, and I came as a transfer student, as you know, Lucy, as a junior. And before my senior year, I decided to run for honor court president.
On our council president?
Honor council president. There was the group that helped just keep the campus living into the ideals
Yes.
that we wanted to. And that was a real step of bravery, because I didn't really know very many people, at that point, but that I was accepted and encouraged to do that was a huge step of a confidence builder for me. And I was able then to see what working with people towards really important things. Because often when you go off to college, you're just sort of focused on your classes and doing doing the best you can for yourself.
Yeah.
And being a part of that particular group, making decisions that had impact across the campus for people's lives was really important. And I would say one of the big shapers in my life was Dr. Cunningham, the president of Salem, when I was there. Was he the president when you were there?
No, but he came in right as I was.
Yes. And on one occasion, we had to make a really difficult decision to let a student go for some infractions against the code. And I remember being in his office with the student's father, who was pressuring us not to do this and offering some incentives not to do this. And Dr. Cunningham stood with me and the group and supported us and backed us. And just seeing that integrity at that level, and the cost and sacrifice of doing the right thing, and that was huge in my life. So I would say that Salem played an enormous role in setting me on a course of being willing to do the hard thing for the right reason.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing when you make time and space in your life to reflect, to think about those inflection points in your life. It really guided you when in that moment, you probably didn't even recognize it as something that might be life shaping for the future, isn't it?
Exactly.
The experience of learning in a safer environment how it impacts you then to go out into one that wasn't so safe, like going into Thailand alone.
Exactly.
And speaking of that, I now want to bring in the baby food story.
Okay.
Because there's apparently an expectation, and I'm going to not get this right, so you correct me. An expectation at one point while you were there that you distribute baby food, apparently, that changed your life. If you can just share with our viewers, how did it shape your personal and professional life, and what decisions did you make as a result of that experience, and why?
Sure. Well, if any of the audience who's been a part of international aid and development will know that there's a lot of things that happen for a lot of reasons, many of them not for the benefit of the people that are supposed to be benefited.
Okay.
And in this particular case, a company in the United States had donated a warehouse full of baby food, that little jars of baby food. And anybody who's traveled in Southeast Asia knows that the food of Southeast Asia is fabulous. It's healthy. It's the vegetables. I remember I would sit in the warehouse at this refugee camp where our office was in the feeding center and just be amazed at the greens and the fruits and just the abundance of produce. And so to imagine somehow taking this little baby food jar that came from across the world and giving a message that this was good, it bothered me very much. I felt that that was not for good motives. And it was really a tax write-off for the company who wanted to donate it. And so I had the task of trying to figure out how to use it. And that was my task. And that's one reason I decided to go on to graduate school, because I was so frustrated that I had no power. I had no power. My voice was not the loudest in the room. And I had to do what I was told to do as an employee. And so I found a way to add it into some brown bag lunches as refugees were transferred to another camp, and they were on the bus for many, many hours. And so it was just like a little additional thing, instead of to make sure that it wasn't connected to feeding children as a preferred way to feed children, especially since many of refugees ended up in Western countries where this would have been much more available. And so at that point, I knew that I wanted to be able to have more power in making decisions that impacted people. And interestingly, I wanted to, and it didn't play out for many years, but now it's very much a part of my life, to ask the hard questions of why are we doing things, and what are the changes we hope to see because we're doing certain things, and having that as our guide. So we do this because we want to see this happen, and be honest about that. Be honest about that. And so that led me into the field of evaluation eventually.
Yeah, we'll get to very shortly. But what an amazing story. And again, one of those inflection points is your life that you can go back to and say, this moment, this piece changed my life forever in terms of what you decided to do with your life. Fascinating, and taking full advantage of it. Now, you went from Thailand in that experience, I think, to Kenya, if I remember right. Is that right?
No, I went to Kenya just on a trip with my parents. No, I went to UCLA.
So, yes, okay.
Yeah. And was doing my degree and finishing there. And then my husband and I went to Kenya when we had 2 little kids and volunteered in a medical center there. But then I maintained my contact with Kenya and worked for about 12 or 15 years with a women's empowerment group in Kenya that helped women get access to clean water by harvesting rainwater from their roofs.
You know, I just can't help, as Salem transitions to a focus on health leadership, you've talked food and now you've talked water and clean water.
The essentials.
I was getting ready to say, just remember as I think about the hierarchy of needs and the things that one must have to live physically even successfully in this world. You're at the very basic intersection of how these things come together in terms of determining your health and wellness in this world.
Yes. And when you get the basics and you help people, you empower people to get the basics. You don't give you empower people. That's where the joy comes, and that's where transformation happens. There's in the experience with Kenya, these women that were able to all of a sudden have fresh water in their home, rainwater that was captured in these large tanks. They had some of them had up to 6 hours a day that they were no longer having to walk to find water. In those 6 hours, so much happened. Opportunities that they were able to then step into because that basic need had been taken care of. So it was really an exciting connection with Kenya. I still stay in connection with my friends there, although that particular work is I'm not involved in anymore.
You're not involved now. But it made, obviously, both of those experiences made such an impact on you. And I wonder what they taught you, and you're already kind of beginning to foreshadow that, but about global health inequity and the role you wanted to play in it and what it feels like today. And then we're going to move into your evaluation piece, but I have to push on this one more time.
Okay. Well, I have had some pretty dramatic experiences with observing inequity. I think one that we haven't talked about before, Lucy, but when my kids were I had a 2nd grader, a 7th, and an 8th grader. My husband and I went and lived on a hospital ship for 6 months in West Africa. And my husband's a surgeon, and so he is very active with Mercy ships, which is many of the listeners might know of Mercy ships. And so my role was to be a part of the community health team, which is something I've always loved, community health work. And so I would go out every day to a village and be a part of, in supporting the local people who were community health workers in how they were in coming up with lessons and in ways, using the oral tradition and just culturally appropriate ways to share health and give people knowledge, help people gain knowledge so they could make decisions. And in that case, I think the biggest impact of that trip is just watching what happens when people have no access to healthcare. A small little tumor in your tooth that your dentist would pick up when it's the size of a grain of a sesame seed grows into the size of a watermelon, and it ends up asphyxiating people because there's no access to healthcare. And in a world with so much opportunity, so much wealth, so much resource, that inequity doesn't need to be there. It just doesn't need to be there. And it's really because of choices we make in our life. And so when it comes to equity, it's about access. It's about access that doesn't depend on where you live. It doesn't depend on the color of your skin. It doesn't depend on your bank account. Healthcare, people should have access to healthcare, to basic healthcare, to quality healthcare. And so my commitment in my life is to do the things I can to ensure that there's a little more of equity every day.
Thank you. And now you're all about measuring the success of providing better equity and other things as well. Why don't you tell us how all this is pulled through? What are you doing now? And what impact does that make in the world?
Well, when I'll just quickly preface it, when my youngest was graduating from high school, my second was graduating from high school, and I knew the other one was close behind, and I needed to really refashion myself. And I felt very far away from my days of my PhD and my work overseas. And so I thought long and hard and decided the best use of it was to get into the field of evaluation. And fortunately, at that point, we were already in Seattle, and University of Washington had a graduate program that I could do in a year. It wasn't an enormous commitment. And so I took that course and then met a professor who hired me, and I started working with him. And then as my youngest graduated from high school, I was hired full-time into a consulting firm that specializes in impact measurement and evaluation. And so in this work, we work with a lot of philanthropy, a lot of foundations, and we work with nonprofits, and we help a process where definition is really important of what the problem you're trying to solve and how you hope that what you do will make that change. And clearly articulating the change you want to see as a result of your work then lays a foundation for how to measure progress towards that change. And so the consulting firm I work with, we work at a pretty high level, systems level, where we're really looking at structural barriers to change. So it's not just a feeding program that you hope whoever you're serving isn't hungry that day. It's more, why are those people hungry in the first place? What are the barriers that are in place in our society that keeps people from having access, for example, to food? And so we work at that level. So it's really interesting. It's very hard. It's intellectually, I'm never bored. And I never feel that smart. So I think sometimes that's good because you're stretched. So that's what I do now. That's what I
can't
do.
ever decide, Paula, when you're that stretched, if it keeps you young or ages you faster. I'm not sure. Perhaps both at times. I don't know.
A little bit of both, especially when deadlines are looming.
Exactly.
Those age quickly.
Yeah, you're not kidding. They age really quickly. But I was thinking, obviously you mentioned problem solving, and for me, that is kind of one of my most interesting areas to think about, because I have this thing in my brain that all too often we look at a problem, we identify there's a problem, and then we jump straight to solution. Okay, so here's the problem. Folks don't have access to drugs the way they need to. And we decide immediately it's because of cost, and we begin working on cost instead of necessarily really defining the problem, which actually might be they don't have transportation to the pharmacy. We may have solved the wrong one. How does problem solving, because it sounds like that's kind of what you do, is problem definition, I think, in a lot of what you do. And then how do you apply metrics to it once we design it? Is that an interesting piece for you? Does that fit into what you do?
Yes. And interestingly, as I look at you with your background of Salem Voices, it's really important to know what voices are at the table to help you understand what the problem is. And those voices from the people who are living the experience are essential. And this comes back to equity. So often we rush to solutions without listening to the people that are most impacted by the problem. And that's a critical piece, that we need to be learners. We need to be humble listeners. And we need to make sure that we're sitting at tables, making those decisions not alone, that we're sitting in the company of people who have lived that experience and can give us insight into what it means to them to be facing no access to pharmaceuticals, like in the case of what you do. And then you would find out that it's transportation and not cost, or you would find out that the clinic is open in hours that don't work for some people, or whatever it would be. But it's really important to be aware of the voices and listening to them and tuned with them. And then in coming up with ways of addressing the issues, making sure that you maintain that connection with the voices and the people that are most impacted.
Which also gets back to some degree to your measurement, doesn't it? Because you need to know if it actually is doing what you hope it does for those that you are serving and solving the problem.
Exactly. The beneficiary, right? The client, the customer, wherever it is, the social program, whoever the audience is, for which that program exists. Yes. How are they being included in both defining the problem and finding solutions? And then one of my big commitments is, if I ask somebody to provide data, then who owns that data? Going back to the people who provide the data and make sure they understand, have a say in how it's interpreted and how it's applied, because that's not an extractive process. It should be a collaborative process.
I wish I were taking notes. I'm going to go back and listen to this carefully because you've had so many wonderful sound bites in this, not an extractive process, but a collaborative one. You think in ways, frankly, that are just beautiful. And I hope our listeners now are picking this up just like I am. Your use of language is just beautiful in terms of thinking and causing me to think. It's really so spot on. And so I'm going to ask you one more kind of thought-provoking thing as we think here. As Salem is transitioning to health leadership in terms of developing women, that leadership component is so important as well. So leader scholars. So we're smart in our health knowledge, but we're also really effective as leaders. As I think about that leadership portion, I'm hearing you, and you're a very humble person. And even as you have led, I have a feeling you have thoughts, and you tell me you're crazy, Liz, you have no idea if that is the case. But you may have strong thoughts about leaders being able to lead from anywhere in an organization and what that looks like, and finding that voice so that you can make change and that one person can make an impact in our world. Can you play with me with that just a bit?
Yeah, that's a fun sandbox.
Okay, yeah.
We're all leaders and we're all followers. There are times in our lives when we do both, and sometimes it actually takes leadership to follow and do some hard places, right?
Yes, right.
Or to follow footsteps that somebody who's gone before.
Right.
But leadership should never be seen as a solo activity. It's not playing solitaire. It is in partnership.
Yes.
And I think that's critical. And so one person will never have the answers to everything, but we catalyze each other in our thinking, and one person may step forward to lead in a particular situation, but seldom alone. There's been a lot of that has gone into that, being able to step out into leadership. So I would say that leadership needs to focus more on, I think, collaborating and partnership and networking so that it is leveraged. So one's particular talents can be leveraged when you bring those talents and gifts in with other people with talents and gifts. And so I think our understanding of leadership has really changed over the last few decades, from kind of that solo born leader, charismatic, wow factor, to people who are living authentically into their values, are willing to sacrifice when it's hard to do the right thing, are willing to speak up when that's a risk, and obviously by example. First of all, if we don't lead by example, then all the ideas we have can sound pretty tinny. So to me, leadership requires humility, first of all, being a very astute listener. I don't think we can lead if we don't know how to listen well. And then being a lifelong learner. And always knowing that we don't know it all. And even when we are in positions of leadership, we will never have the full picture. So who are we relying on? Who are we bringing into the process? What I said earlier, what voices are we listening to? So I see leadership as a kind of an organism, not a one cell event. It's an organism that needs to work and function together.
Wow. Thank you. It's hard for me to even know how to respond when somebody shares things as wise as that. You're just, I don't want to say spot on, because that means I feel like I have to give credibility to what you said, and I don't. It's really, it's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. The thought too, for me, to be able to visualize an organism that's all constantly working together, and that's your systems thinking coming out, isn't it? You know, but also that organism that morphs and it changes to meet the needs of what's going on around it, while inside is doing the same things thoughtfully evaluating and coming back.
Mhm.
It's beautiful what you just said and the way you said it. I'm going to think about that tonight a lot, I think. I want to pick up on just a couple of other things, and then we're going to turn to Salem, and you get to
Okay.
have some fun and play, okay, for the last part of this. But all the statistics show us that when we think about women in leadership positions in the health ecosystem, only 25% are women. The 75% are men. From your perspective, how important is it to you to have a higher percentage of women help us lead in health from whatever position that may be? How important is it to you that more voices be heard in the policy rooms, in the advocacy rooms, in the leadership business rooms, all of that in the health ecosystem?
It only makes sense, doesn't it? That we're 50% of the population. We need to be represented, and our voice and our perspective is essential, especially when it comes to health. So many women have the responsibility of the health of the family and the children, the health of our own bodies, and all that implies. And also just a unique perspective that's just different. And that's why our voices and women's voices are so important, as are the voices of marginalized groups as well, in places of leadership, so that we have a fuller picture of what's going on, what needs to be done, and how it can be done.
Yeah. And I think about things like women and other marginalized groups as well, or marginalized groups as well, not having the same voice at the table, and the impact that makes on investment in research in women's health issues or in other people's health issues that are not at the table. What that means for the future when the voices are not there in helping folks communicate the difference in how a disease might present in women than it does in men. And so heart attacks go unrecognized in women all too often. Those kinds of things, having the diverse voices at the table, women and marginalized groups that way, seems to me just to be such an important piece of all of this puzzle in terms of bringing the health equity that you talked about right back to the forefront again.
And what's prioritized.
And what's prioritized, yes, and what's prioritized, but actually gets to the top, and are all those voices being heard? Wow. Okay, lastly, I want to pick up on one last thing, because you keep talking about, and I'm fascinated with this, the concept of listening carefully, having all the right people at the table, having the people you're serving particularly at the table, both before, during, but also after. And you mentioned the word networking a minute ago. For me, networking is such a buzzword these days. Everybody uses it almost like you're doing, quick dates or whatever. To me, it's building mutually beneficial relationships is what true networking is.
Yes.
But I just wonder, with your wisdom and your experiences, when you say networking, how do you define that in your brain? What do you mean by that?
Well, it doesn't mean for one's personal advancement, but it means leveraging. It means leveraging. So I was a part of evaluating a leadership program for a large foundation in this country, and it was called the Community Leadership Network. And the network is where the power is. Because again, we don't do things alone, we do things in partnership. And so it's always interesting to me, and my connection, more recent connection with Salem is through a mutual friend of ours, Jenny Smith McLaurin. And it was interesting that through a network, we reconnected, and then have had this very rich work relationship and friendship. And it was because we were brought together through mutual friends. And so it's again, that idea of the organism, right? It's not one person out there on their own. It's this connection. It's like the connective tissue. So it is a buzzword, but I think if we see it as connective tissue, pulling the right things in so that that we can do more than we could do on our own.
That's just a beautiful way to say that again. I think when we say networking, sometimes it clicks into people's minds as shallow or speed dating or whatever. And that's not your use of the term at all. It's powerful.
And the word, transactional versus transformational, right? So much of like the looking at it like speed dating, it's a transaction. What can I get out of this?
That's right.
If I join this group or this group, but transformational, it's what can we do together to change something that needs to be changed? How can I work with you? How can I meet the right people that want to come together on this subject or this problem, this issue? And that's different. That's networking for transformation.
That's right. It's a whole different mindset as one approaches it. What's in it for us as opposed to just what's in it for me, for the greater good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to, speaking of greater good, we're going to transform ourselves right now. Our little organism will still be working hard inside, but now we're going to kind of change gears just a little bit and talk about Salem. So just to get you warmed up and to get you thinking again, now you've already told folks, now we can do our little happy dance or whatever. But you've already told our audience that you came as a junior. So you went to Montreat Anderson, I think, when it was a 2-year school back in the day, and you transferred to Salem. So, but you still have plenty of time. 2 years is plenty of time to become honor council chairman. So that should say it all. All right. So plenty of time to think. So what was your favorite course in those 2 years?
Sociology, introduction to sociology.
Intro to social. I wish we had time to play this out, but now I'm just going to do little bam, bam, bams. All right. What faculty member do you say had the greatest impact on you?
Dr. Harris. She was a professor of sociology.
Oh, okay. So it goes along that the two classes and okay.
Well, can I just say why?
Yes, would you please?
For my senior project, I did a nutritional anthropology study among the Otomi indigenous group in Mexico. And when I wrote it up, she was the first person who, when she read my ethnography, she said, I was a scholar. And I had never seen myself as a scholar before. And so the impact of her words in my life were transformational. So that's why she's my favorite.
Whoa, how beautiful is that? And what a testament to her.
Yes.
A, to say it, B, to recognize it in you. But to tell a college student at that point, they're a true scholar, is clearly powerful, isn't it?
It was so powerful. I'd never seen myself that way before.
Thank you for stopping me.
I needed to share that. And I don't know where she is in the world. If she's still with us, I hope someday I'll have a chance to tell her that. I
hope so too. And if somebody is listening and they know her and know where she is, I hope they send her this link and or connect you to.
Yes.
That's lovely and quite powerful. Whoa. Okay, thank you. So what was your favorite tradition on campus?
Easter sunrise service.
Mine too. Mine too. What did you like best about it?
Oh, it was just so profoundly symbolic. The music of the band, the early morning. It was always, obviously spring. Usually there was the years I was able to attend signs of spring, depending, of course, when the holiday fell. Just the crowd moving toward together. I love it. I have always wanted to go back. To this day, I remember being waked up by the brass bands playing antiphonally all over the place as they worked their way to the square. I can feel it as we talk. Yes.
Thank you for the memories. I love that. All right. Yeah. You've kind of answered this already, but I'm just going to give you a chance if there's anything else you want to fill in. Because looking back, reflecting now, and I've tried to get us in the mood here, we've even been thinking about traditions. How would you say Salem prepared you for your work success? And I mean success in however you measure that. Was there anything else that you've missed that you want to share about how Salem may have prepared you? Because you said a lot. So.
Yeah, I think I've said the confidence, building my confidence. Dr. Harris's words, like I said, were transformational.
Yeah.
Being in a safe place, I more and more recognize the importance of being in safe places that allow you to grow before there's a ebb and a flow, right? You need to be in safe places. You move into places of risk. You come back to safe places. I really see Salem. It was such a safe place for me as a woman. The respect I felt for my intellect, it was so influential in my life. So all those things, the friends I made, just created greater confidence to step out into life afterwards.
It's funny, I was reading over the weekend something that gets to exactly what you just said, that to me got to the heart of Salem. So it made me, when you just said it just now, it brought it back from the weekend read. That was the whole concept of how you really learn, especially how you really learn confidence and to be a leader, is to practice the real thing, but in a safe environment. So you're practicing the real thing, just as an example, being honor council chair and having Cunningham do what he did, supporting you and all that. It was a real thing.
A real thing.
A real thing. But ultimately, and the risks were high because you were dealing with a real student, but ultimately in the greater scheme of the bigger world, the risks weren't as high as they might have been later. And so it gave you a real chance to practice risk-taking and learning in a safer environment, which is one of those beautiful things, I think, Salem, based on its size and its support.
Yes, yes.
It's amazing. I normally ask now too, again, about secret sauce. What is the Salem secret sauce that really allowed you to love your time there so much? And it's probably different than developing courage or the leadership skills. What made you happy there?
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, but when I was applying for colleges to transfer to, and I went to Salem for a weekend, and I peeked into the refectory through the refectory windows, and I saw that there were tablecloths on the tables and little vases of some greenery. That had me. And I say that because
it is a surprise, but I love it because you never know. I never know what somebody's going to say for that question.
The reason that was so significant to me is when I left Mexico City and went to Montreat, I had never been in kind of institutional life at all. And I took my own, I actually bought myself a placemat to put on the college, on the table, so I could feel a little more control and cleanliness, you know. But anyway, that was just so funny. And I say that obviously was a small thing, but I think it expressed something so much deeper.
Yes.
That the quality of our life, it's in the details, right? A lot of it's in the details. How the hospitality that we express to people is often in the details. And those details, just what those details to me say is you're important. You have value. And so I think that's the secret sauce of Salem.
Wow, thank you. All right, I'm going to now transport you to the time you were there, but fast forward as well to the time now and ask you, what letter would you write? What advice would you give to your 20-year-old self, or really more realistically, to those 20-year-olds and 18 to 22-year-olds who are there now, knowing what you now know and with, you know, a portion of life experience?
Yeah.
What would you tell them? How should they experience best what they're doing now?
I love a quote by Frederick Buechner. I'm sure you've heard of this quote. Your vocation in life is where your greatest joy meets the world's greatest need. And in my life, I have found so much joy. So I think the letter I would have written to myself is follow the joy. Not the happiness, not the feel good momentary pleasure, the joy. Follow the joy. And that will lead you into good places. I would have liked to heard that early, because I've discovered it through so many things and through hard things.
Yeah.
The joy is so different than happiness. So I would have written that quote and I would have said, follow the joy.
Okay. And normally I would let that just be. But you just said, and I can't let this go quite yet, difference between joy and happiness. How would you, if somebody's listening and they're trying to understand what you mean, and they could well be, what's the difference to you, just very briefly, in joy versus happiness?
Happiness is dependent on circumstances, and those can change in a second. You know, I mean, you can have a bad diagnosis. Your marriage can fall apart. Many hard things can happen. Joy is something that is deeper than that. And I think it is connected to purpose and to knowing value, your personal value to the world. And one of the things I would love to if I was writing not a letter to myself, but speaking to young women at Salem now, is to really know your value. The world needs you. The world needs you. Doesn't need somebody like you. It needs you. You have a place. You have an important place. Step into it. Step into it with courage. Step into it with confidence. And find where your joy intersects with the world's greatest need.
Thank you. Thank you. And normally, you may just want to end this here. Normally, I would say, do you have any final thoughts? Or any most important thing you want to distill? But the way you just said that, I can't imagine. But if you do, I'm going to leave it with you right now. Anything else? Any other words of wisdom you'd love to share before we bring this to a close?
I think I've said it. Just if one thing that I'm constantly working on are my listening skills. There's a lot of noise out there. Choose who you listen to. Be careful who you listen to, but listen. And learn, and learn.
I'm still listening. You're amazing. You're just amazing. The wisdom that you have shared with us in the last 45 minutes is rather overwhelming, and a true gift to anybody who's just listened to you. So on behalf of all those who will, and all those that I hope will even more down the line, thank you. I just sharing your time today is a gift for all of us. So on behalf of everyone, thank you. And thank you, the listeners, for listening today and for being a part of Salem Voices. I'll see you again very soon, and I look forward to that. But just for now, thank you, Paula. And together, what I love to do, Paula, we end all of these kind of on a fist bump together, okay? Until I see you again, you and the listeners, Salem strong.
Strong.